I got a couple of questions rolling around in my mind right now, and one of them is, do we shape God in our own image? And the answer is almost certainly yes, and I guess the question is that okay? The other question I have is, how does that connect to the question about pride, arrogance that we humans so much have? So let's think about that a little bit. I'm Jeremy Williams. I'm the pastor at Community United Methodist Church, and you're at The Takeout. I'm so glad you're here, and everybody is welcome, no matter how you conceive God. Because we all do differently. We all feel differently about God. We all imagine God differently. And sometimes we want to impose our imagination about God on other people. And that's a dumb idea, but we do it. I mean, the slave owners in the South years ago used to want very much for their slaves to think of God as meek. Jesus is meek and mild, and always accepting, and being passive. And on the other hand, they wanted to paint God as vengeful and angry and judging, so that the slaves wouldn't rebel because they would be afraid of judgment, and so that they would feel like the right way to follow Jesus was to be meek and mild and submissive. Wow. So it's very useful to frame God in one way or another. I've known for years that we frame God according to how we frame our fathers or mothers, parents. We shape them shape God according to our imagination of how authority looks in our lives. And if authority is capricious in our lives, then we imagine God as capricious. If authority is orderly and tidy in our lives, then we imagine God that way. And if God is a suffering God, and if we are a suffering people, then we get along well. We understand that God is with us in our suffering. If God is a God for whom everything is nice and beautiful and sunny, and God is always presented as happy and cheerful, then we wonder, where's the relevance of this God to my much messier, harder life? If I have suffering, I really need to see that in God. I want to say, I think there's no problem with that. I need to see God in different ways from the way you need to see God, or someone else needs to see God. So as long as we're on that, I think God appears to deal with all of us according to what we can deal with. If you're in a Pentecostal tradition, then you need to encounter God as one who brings miracles, who brings excitement, who brings a baptism of the Spirit, who the heart of worship is reporting the stories of miracles and getting excited about it. And if we're not celebrating, it's not worship. And likewise, if you're Episcopalian or something, if you're not doing the liturgy right, then you're really not faithful to God. And where are you? Somewhere in the middle. All of that is reflecting on how we relate to God, and the core idea, I guess, is that God relates to us in different ways. God sees us as we are, and we think of ourselves as the norm, as the way I am, it must be the way it is for everybody. And then, until we actually leave the country or go to a different town and go to a different church and find out that other people think very differently than I do. People of a different political persuasion, people of a different economic status, people with a different education, people, from different backgrounds feel differently about things. And we thought it all made sense, and we thought there was a right answer to everything. We thought that there were absolutes. And the answer is no. Not so many absolutes when it comes to humans talking about God. So there was a guy named Naaman, and this is a story from 2 Kings. Naaman was a big-time general for the king of Syria. And so he was important, and he acted like he was important, and he thought he was important, and everybody else treated him and thought like he was important, and people were kind of afraid of him. And he expected God to act like he acted. He expected miracles to happen because we did something grand and great. And then there was a prophet named Elisha. And Elisha thought that God just does what God does, and God doesn't have to make a show about it. And then there was a king who had no hope. Now, which one is right? In a way, they're all right. And yet, the trouble with Naaman in the story is that Naaman brings pride, and he thinks that because he feels a certain way, that therefore God should act a certain way. Therefore, everyone else should relate to God the way he does. Let me read you a story. And it is from 2 Kings, chapter 5. I'm not going to read the whole story. I'll tell you the story. So the trouble is, Naaman, this big-time general, gets sick. He gets a skin disease, and they always call these things leprosy in the Bible, but he had some kind of a skin disease. And he wanted healing, and a servant said, you know where to go. You go to Israel, they've got a prophet down there, can get you set up. Because we know that divine power is needed to make this thing happen, and Naaman understands that. So I'll go to Israel, fine. Maybe I need to address this God with the kind of power and authority that I'm accustomed to addressing things. So Naaman goes and gets an order from the king, a letter to the king of Israel. Just go right to the top, right? Because surely the top of the political heap is where things get done, because that's the way Naaman works, and it's the way Naaman sees God, and so naturally that's how we'll do it. Gets a letter from the king, takes it to the king of Israel. The king of Israel freaks out. Oh my gosh. Because the king of Syria said, take care of getting my guy healed, will you? And the king of Israel has no faith to speak of, not enough. And he's scared to death, and he starts tearing his clothes, because that's apparently what you do back then when you're really upset. Tearing his clothes because he's paranoid, or he's just despairing and fear, because Naaman is going to come crush his city, crush his nation, because they're big and Israel's little and puny, and that's where we are. And we think sort of habitually that God is on the side of the big and powerful. And yet we know perfectly well God is on the side of the people with need. God is on the side of the powerless. God is on the side of the poor. God is on the side of the weak and the sick. The widows and the orphans, they're always getting the mention from Jesus. God is on the side of people who can't stick up for themselves. And at the beginning of the story, both Naaman and the king of Israel, they're both thinking, God is messing with me. And we'll take this to the top level, and the bigger nation wins. You know, we as Americans have that kind of arrogance that we've practiced often. And you know, when I came here from Britain when I was small, well, no doubt, I came from the country that believed in empire more than any other nation believed in empire. Somehow, our arrogance does not mean that God is on our side. Our earthly power does not mean that heavenly power is working for us. He thought that's how it works. Maybe habitually we think, you know, I've been realizing we think a lot of things without thinking. We have assumptions that we haven't thought about. And one of them is God is on the side of powerful people. It must be so, we think, because powerful people keep getting more. Rich people keep getting richer, and the poor people keep getting poorer. So God must be on the side of the rich people. No, the rich people are on the side of the rich people, and the rich people have money, and they control a lot of power, and so the rich people keep getting more power and more money. And the poor people don't, so they keep getting less. But God remains on the side of the people in need, and maybe we should say on the side of everybody. But God has a special love and concern always for those who don't have a voice at the table, for those who don't have power. God is on their side. So Naaman takes this letter to the king. The king freaks out. When Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, he sent a message to the king. Why did you tear your clothes? Let him come to me, so that he may know that there is a prophet in Israel. Darn tootin'. Darn tootin'. It has nothing to do with God's power, has nothing to do with whether they've got a big army. God doesn't care about their big army. God doesn't care about their fine clothes and their big horses and their all this stuff. God does not care. God is always interested in people with less. Or else why did Francis sell everything he had? Why did Jesus say to a man who wanted to follow him, well, fine, sell all your stuff, come follow me. And the man went away sad, and Jesus loved him. But, well, how hard it is to leave things behind. But leaving things behind is the beginning of following Jesus, leaving all our other stuff, our other concerns, our other priorities. Leaving those behind is what we absolutely have to do when we really want to follow Jesus. So, Naaman came with his horses and chariots. I just want you to picture this. You know, it's your house. It's some little bungalow. And here comes this procession of horses and people on horses looking like they're ready to fight. He's got his personal guard, I'm sure. He's a big general. Rolls up in front of your house. And anybody would be intimidated. But Elisha is absolutely not intimidated. Because Elisha is the only one in the story who gets it. It's not about money. It's not about shows of human power. It's not about intimidation. It's not about God being on the side of the powerful. At this moment, Naaman is just a guy who's sick, who needs healing. He needs to let go of his attitude problem. He needs to stop thinking that he can tell God what to do. He needs to stop imagining that somehow his power makes a difference to God and God's willingness to heal him. He needs to let go of all of that. And we all do. I need to let go of believing that it's better to sing these songs than those songs, or it's better to have this kind of a worship service instead of that kind of worship service. I need to get over thinking that my car is better than your car, or I need to get over thinking anything that puts us all on different steps. I need to get past that. I need to let go of that entirely. Naaman needs to let go of that entirely. And Naaman is out there in front of Elisha's little house and brings all his stuff. And Elisha has a servant whom we'll meet. If you keep reading the story, you'll meet the servant. And Elisha says, you go outside and tell him what to do. Tell him to go wash in the Jordan River 7 times and he'll be clean and healed. And the servant is like, not getting it. The servant is not Elisha. The servant doesn't see that God is not impressed with the money. God is not impressed with the power. God is not impressed with the show of force. God is not interested. here is a guy who needs a miracle, who needs a healing, and we're going to do something. I guess Elisha could have said, okay, he's better, and not come down. But there's this opportunity to say, your understanding of yourself and your understanding of God and how they connect to each other needs to be softened. And I have an opportunity to do it right now so that you may know, as he said earlier, that there is a prophet in Israel. There's someone here who speaks for God, and it ain't you, and it doesn't matter how much stuff, how much power you have. It doesn't make you more qualified to speak for God than somebody else. So, go wash in the river of Jordan. It's a humble little river. It's a wide creek in many places. It's a narrow creek sometimes. It ain't much and it's muddy. Go wash there. And Naaman receives this and says, what the heck? What the heck? I thought, sure, we'd get the guy to come downstairs and or outside and do a little hocus pocus and wave his hands over the spot and make it get better. That's what it says. And he didn't. And so Naaman gets mad and goes away. Because we are so much more willing to be impressed by a God who is impressed by me. I thought surely for me he would come down. I am important. For me he should have come out. And he didn't even bother. And Naaman is insulted. Yeah, but you're knocking on God's door. You're not just knocking on Elisha's door. You're knocking on God's door saying, give me a miracle. And you expect God to do what you want because you want it, because you're that important. No, it doesn't work that way. He goes away in a huff. His servants finally get a hold of him when he cools down just a little bit and say, a father, they call him father, if he'd have asked you to, take elephants over the Himalayas, you'd have said okay. If he'd have asked you to climb a mountain barefoot and come back down on your head, you would have done that. You would have been impressed by that because that was demanding, and you understand a hard demand, and you think God's going to make a hard demand on you because that's how you think about God. They didn't say all these things. They said, Master, if he'd asked you something hard, you would have done it, right? So he just asked you this simple thing. So what about it? Naaman relents. He goes washes in the river. And he is indeed impressed. He is indeed impressed because he gets all healed. He gets all clean. And the story goes on. There's a lot more story. And it's fun. It's a great read. It's in chapter 5. It keeps going. Of 2 Kings. Are you trying to impress God? Are you trying to prove to God that you understand God better than God does? Are you trying to prove to God that you are wiser and more spiritual than somebody else? Because, you're not, and I'm not, for darn sure. We are what we are, and we are all limited. And whether we have power or we have experience, whether we have knowledge, we have education, whether we have money, whether we have other people telling us we're important, really doesn't matter to God. God looks at me and God looks at you. And God says, just talk to me like you. I want to relate to you as you are. You need miracles. We can do miracles. You need help. We can do help. You need love and affirmation. We can do love and affirmation. You need anger. Yeah, God does anger too. It's not up to me to tell God who God is. But I do need to come humble. Allow myself to be weak. Allow myself to be just me. in front of God. So there's a challenge this week. Can it be just you in front of God? No pretense, no pride, no superiority. And then God says, welcome. Let's talk about your need now. God bless you. Thanks for being here today.